Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, owner of the company Horns of Odin. And as always, before we get into today's show, I do have to plug our Patreon. As I say, every week it's how we keep the lights on, it's how we keep the podcast going. So if you do enjoy this show, you can always get kind of an extension to every episode that we do in the form of our Q&A with our guests, where basically you get to ask a guest your question after the main show. And these episodes tend to have a lot more information in them. They are just like an extension of the main show, but patrons get to ask their questions, and it tends to be stuff that maybe me and Mags have missed. And there tends to be a lot of information in there and a lot of kind of bonus stuff. So do go and check those out. It starts from £3 a month, which is roughly 10p a day. And then from there we have bonus storytime episodes with both Claire Moulet and Jonas Lorentzen, which are a lot of fun. And you get the whole back catalogue as well. You don't have to just get from when you sign up going forward. You get years of content to kind of binge through. So if you do enjoy the show, please go and check that out. And if you can't support on Patreon, then just a 5-star rating and a positive review wherever you get the podcast just helps us bump up, helps us get kind of a little bit more visible. Maybe somebody else is going to find the podcast that hasn't listened to us before. But with that said, let's get into today's show. I'm very much looking forward to this. So I'm joined by my lovely co-host and our in-house archaeologist, Margrethe Havgar. So,
hello, everyone.
And then, do you want to introduce our guest, or would you like me?
It's up to you.
I can do it.
Yeah.
So our guest is, I would call you, Richard, a returning fan favorite. People loved your first episode. I know you get nervous on this, but people gave us genuine good feedback on it. Took us 3 years to get the first episode done. This time it's been a little bit less than that, but our guest is the lovely Richard Wakeman. So, how are you?
Excuse me while I close the window in case you can hear the crackhead downstairs shouting. So bear with me 1 minute. It took them 2 seconds to do that.
That might be the most unusual start to an episode we've ever had.
Yeah, welcome to North London, ladies and gentlemen. But yes, on that lovely note, thank you very much. I am Richard Wakeman. Do you want me to do the intro of what I do?
Yeah, maybe what you do, who you are, why people might find you interesting.
Might want to skip that bit.
Oh, you're always so self-deprecating.
But how to begin this? I'm Richard Wakeman, obviously that's been covered. I've been working at the British Museum for 21 years now. I've been working in museum land since about 1994. I won't say my age, but to basically say I've been working in a museum since I was about 15, 16 years old. I also am a cemetery tour guide in Highgate Cemetery in London, which is one of the Magnificent Seven cemeteries. And it's one of the most famous cemeteries in the world, up there with Père Lachaise. I've been to many cemeteries and many museums around the world as part of my work, installing exhibitions all the way from both sides of the States to all around Europe. I am also a lackey and one half of the newly soon to be Old World Remains Tattoo Studio in Angel in London soon, and I am also formerly the collections manager at Llandudno Museum in North Wales, where I have been for a year because I took a year off at the British Museum, and I've been a collection manager up in North Wales doing some quite amazing things. And I think that, and I go back to work at the British Museum in, what date is it today? In 10 days.
Oh, wow. That's
which
exciting.
Is not really. It's nerve-wracking.
No.
Yeah. It's the best of times. It was the worst of times. Going back to a place you've been away from a year, and a place that's just constantly in motion. It's going back to pretty much, hopefully not start from scratch, but I've forgotten about a lot of things, and I'll be going back into a team which was recruited while I've been away. So I'll be the old dog coming into a place of new people, and I don't want to look like the moron. So it's a lot of stress.
I imagine that a museum isn't updated that often, though. So surely you're going to retain everything that's there. It's not like it's a shop where they change it every 6 months.
Wonderful positive input on that, Dan.
No? Is that not? Am I wrong?
I feel you, Richard. I feel you. I get it.
Cool, thank you. Well, that's kind of one of the things that when you asked me to come back on the show and I said, yeah, no problem. And then you said, well, what do you want to talk about? I had no idea what to talk about at all. And that's why I thought, because I've been working in a relatively small museum for a year, compared to the gargantuan machine of somewhere like a national museum. And you can switch national museums for like the British Museum to the Louvre or the Victoria and Albert Museum. You can kind of interchange those because they're just same kind of scale. But when you compare those to the little museums, it depends how they're run. You have the big museum, and the BM is going through some changes. They've got a massive, it's called the Rosetta. We used to be called the Rosetta Project, but now it's the master plan of changing the very foundations and the fabrics of the building. And
shit.
yes, it was going to be estimated for 1.5 billion to renovate the building while keeping it open if possible and doing it.
Oh shit.
Yeah,
I wonder how much of that cost is purely just insurance and looking after the artifacts and moving them, because there must be a huge cost in having to protect things whilst you've got building works going
on. My level, that decision, pay grade, somewhere up there.
Yeah.
But I can go into some of the things about that maybe later in the conversation from the little kind of scheme of things. Where was I? But yes, it kind of goes into the little museum. Because even that's if you think about a museum, so if you talk about the Victoria and Albert Museum in South Kensington, or the Natural History Museum in South Kensington, or the British Museum in Bloomsbury, you have to think of them as physically as a site in one place in London, but they're that big an institution that the V&A has another building site in East London, which they just built opening in Stratford. And they also have a place in Scotland up in Dundee, if I'm not mistaken. And the Natural History Museum has another substation, has Natural History Museum in Tring, which is near Milton Keynes, if my geography isn't terrible. And the British Museum has the Bloomsbury site, but it also has another site, which is just being constructed in Reading. So they're that big, they actually have other secondary sites, which are open to the public if you can book, and for students and stuff like that. They're that big, that the collections are that big that they literally spawn other places. Whereas the little museums, they definitely don't have that. If they're lucky. But sometimes that constructs its own little problems as well. How do you employ members of staff specifically for that site? Do you get members of staff to travel from site to site? It's a whole different kettle of fish. But yeah, the money for that kind of thing is it's insane. Like building the whole building from scratch. And typically the V&A went into the V&A world and they bought a place in Stratford near West Ham and the former Olympic Village, not building outside of London where it's much cheaper. They just went, no, we're just building the most expensive place in London. That's totally fine.
Yeah,
I probably shouldn't say anything to disparage other museums during this, because it's a very small world in museum land. It's very inbred.
So yeah, I was just checking when you were last here. So we published the last episode in April 2023. So I think it was just before you stopped at the British Museum.
Yes, I'd gone back to pick up the Chertsey tiles, the medieval Crusaders tiles. That's when I was on the floor not literally laid out on the floor. That's when I was sitting on the floor talking to you from Boston, which is very cool. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah,
and I'd quit. I didn't quit the museum. I took a year because I've been there for 20 years, and I basically took a year off for various reasons. And then it's been a up and down years since then, but I've done some amazing things for a little museum, which is fantastic. And one of them, it led up to. Sorry to interrupt. It led up to because basically, how much would you like me to say? Or how much should I say?
You can say as much as you have, as much as you
as
want.
much as you like, as much as you want.
Okay.
Whatever you feel comfortable with.
This is a Zoom talk. I feel comfortable with absolutely nothing.
That's fair. That is very fair.
Basically, to cut a long story short, I was offered a job in North Wales, but I didn't want to fully commit to taking a risk of throwing away a 20-year career in the British Museum. And it's good that I did that, because when I got there, the job didn't actually exist, and it was for a company that was probably one of the most dysfunctional and disorganized things I'd ever seen. But only found out about that when I got there face to face. However, I'm a man with a plan, and I don't like walking into anything without plan B. So
That's good.
before I'd actually left London, I'd already emailed the local museum down the road from where I was moving to say, hey, I'm Richard Wakeman from the British Museum. I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. I've already visited you previously. Do you need somebody like me to help you at the museum do anything? And I was quite adamant that anything. If they need me selling tickets on the front door, then I'll do that. If they need me just walking around, pinning objects or doing displays, I'll do that. If they need me doing like working with school kids, I could do anything, because I like museums. Because there's no cemetery to walk around there and give tours of Victorian like symbology and stuff like that. So yeah, I ended up having a meeting there after I realized the other job wasn't going to happen. And then I became their collection manager pretty much straight away. After they realized that I wasn't lying about what I could do, and the director basically, I worked with them for 2 weeks, and I said to the director, I think I can improve things doing this, and that. Can I just show you a small change of what I can do, and we'll see how it goes. And after I did a small change in one of their stores, they basically said, do whatever the hell you want. And I changed, pretty much everything, which is fantastic, having the support in just one person to say that. And that's one of the things about small versus big museums sometimes. It's not one person one man can make a difference. It's more that one person might say something, and then there's not 6 months or to a year or 2 years of decision making to go into it. Smaller museums, it's usually, if somebody's got a good idea, let's do it. If it works, great. If it doesn't, then we'll go on to the next idea. Whereas larger museums, and I can totally understand, and I can see the benefits of why larger museums, sometimes it can take a long time to get anything done, because there are certain pitfalls. If you rush into anything, one, it could go horribly wrong. And a loss of financial loss could be taken, and the big hits from it. And sometimes things can collapse, fall down, and that's a whole different kettle of fish. But at smaller museums, there's more of a kind of a group input. There's lots less walls and bureaucracy to go through. But the problem is there's a lot more risk, because there's less money in smaller museums.
Right.
And if it doesn't work for the smaller museum, there's only a finite amount of funding for it. So if the idea doesn't work, it's like, well, there goes our budget for a whole year, unless we can get another grant for it. But the museum in Llandudno have been absolutely fantastic. It's been just a honor. I know it sounds weird that I work with some of the things I do at the British Museum with the Sutton Hoo collection, Lindo Man, all the stuff that I love working with. But it's been an honor and a privilege working for Llandudno for a year. They've been absolutely fantastic. And my last job for them before I left was, and this is great because I waited and waited and waited until I haven't even posted on my Instagram account. We finally unveiled, I say we because I don't work there anymore. They finally unveiled new Roman coin hoard that went on display as of yesterday.
Amazing.
There was a hoard found 2 years ago.
About 2 years ago, and they already got it on display.
Well, yes, that's the thing.
See, here's the bigger museum versus smaller local museum.
Yeah.
Well, it could have gone on display about a month ago, but we had to wait for and if we wanted to do a special event, we wanted to get the metal detectorist up to come and actually see it on display. So I've been back in London a month, but I actually did it last. The case has been up in Llandudno Museum, covered by a red cloth, to wait till we do a unveiling for the metal detectorist. But it's fantastic. Originally it was 300 coins. It was two hoards. There was 300 coins, and it was split between 37 silver denarii, and the rest still at National Museum in Cardiff. But we did all the work, and we put the coins on display last month, and they finally got unveiled yesterday, which is quite fantastic. It's still left a piece of my heart there. But one of the cool things about it, instead of just putting the coins on display, because I requisitioned an old display case because I thought it looks quite old-fashioned, but it's quite secure. So the new display case could cost anything between £1,000 to £5,000. But I requisitioned an old display case from the museum's basement, brought it upstairs, we repainted it, resecured it, and not only have we got the coins, it's got things like Trajan, Hadrian, all the kind of like big hitters of the Roman emperors. But we've got them central, all the coins, and next to it, instead of it just being the famous big hitters, we actually put some pottery with the names of people who had the pottery. So we've got the big famous people in the middle, and we've got the locals as well. So we didn't want it to just tell the story of, hey, we're the Roman emperors, aren't we famous? We wanted to tell a story of the local area as well, because local museums are good for that. It's not just the big kind of things, it's the local areas. And if it's a local coin hoard found in the local area and it's not going to British Museum, it's not going to Cardiff, we want to keep it all about the people. And I kind of prefer that in local museums as well. Sorry, I'm just rambling about Wales now.
No, it's fine. How does that work in a terms of, so where was this hoard found? And then how do they determine it goes to Llandudno instead of things like the British Museum or the museum in Cardiff? Because I assume if anything of great importance would always get snapped up by the bigger ones, and do little ones like fight against it? And can they put up much of a fight?
Well, it's a big conversation. It was found in Conway County, and it was a Canovian fort, so it was a big Roman fort. If you think of Vindolanda up near Hadrian's Wall, it's very similar. And some of the people that were garrisoned at Vindolanda are also garrisoned at Canovium, so it's a really important fort. And if you know Vindolanda, it's still going on, the excavations there. It's where they found all the letters and they translated them. So it was if you think about the British Museum, it's got things like the Rosetta Stone, the Parthenon marbles, Sutton Hoo, Lewis Chessman. They did a vote of people's favorite objects of all of those kind of like big hitters, and the Vindolanda tablets got #1 out of all that. Which is quite amazing, because it's basically, you think it's going to be Rome for the emperor for duty and honor, but when they translated these letters, it was can somebody please send me a pair of socks, the weather up here is bloody horrible. It's all stuff like that, which we can all relate to. If you've ever got to London on a cold winter's day, or if you ever got to Scotland on a cold winter's day, the first thing you do these days is send a WhatsApp saying like, fucking hell, it's freezing.
Especially if you're from Rome.
Yeah, exactly. And most of the people from the people went up to Vindolanda or Canovian, they're all from the Iberian Peninsula and Rome, so it was a little bit different. But yeah, going back to the actual question, so I've probably been drinking way too much wine. If you find a hoard, because it comes under the Treasure Act. I think Scotland has a different act, but when the Treasure Act changed, I think in 1996, you have, if you find something, metal detectorists or anything, I think you've got 2 weeks to report it to Finds Liaison Officer at local coroner. And if you don't, you could get in a little bit of trouble.
Is that anything, or?
Treasure comes, I think it's on either the amount of precious metal. If it was left to, bear in mind that the actual Treasure Act, I think, is nearly 150 pages long. So trying to remember any specific bit of it when I'm definitely not a treasure expert. It's a bit tricky. But basically, this was found by 2 metal detectorists. They reported it. They took really good details of the actual site. It was a proper archaeologist team went out there to find the rest, and that's when they found 300 coins. But then you get things like Staffordshire Hoard, which is one of the biggest hoards. They found Sutton Hoo was big until they found Staffordshire a few years back. The little hoard for Llandudno, it went to National Museum of Wales where it was conserved, and then it was they coordinate with the British Museum who do the who've got two treasure teams. Then it goes to the coroner, and they decide if it is treasure and where it goes to as well. National Museum of Wales, they decided to give the 37 coins to Llandudno Museum. And the British Museum, and this is where there's that really famous, I think it was Peep Show, where they've got the army guys doing a little skit, and they say, "Are we the bad guys?" Because I'm not sure if it's Peep Show, but I think most people remember that too, dressed up as Nazis, and they're saying perhaps we're the bad guys. Sometimes working for the British Museum, British Museum does get a lot of bad rap for that, but a lot of people don't think that as soon as an object gets found, it's like, oh, that's going to the British Museum, or that's going to go down to London. But the British Museum has a habit also of, we've got one of the biggest loan projects in museums. We constantly sending objects around the world on loans, and things like the Staffordshire Hoard, instantly we said we haven't got room for it, so of course we can't take it. And the British Museum doesn't have room for much. It's a massive museum when you walk into it, but you've probably seen all the cases are full. And there's a lot of we call spotlight tours. We send a lot of small objects back out. There's a Shropshire sun pendant that was found a few years ago. It's a little gold bullet. It was on display in the British Museum for 4 months for the Stonehenge exhibition. But even before that, it went straight back out to Shropshire. So it was conserved. It was declared as treasure. British Museum has ownership of it, but it was sent straight back out on tour, and it hasn't come back to the BM yet. It's been constantly touring around to local museums and stuff in the museum. The Tate, I mean, the National Gallery's been sending out paintings as well as like to more local places, not just like big institutions. And it's that kind of thing. So things do get to the BM or to other big museums, but they do still go around the world for other people to see them. And I think all that kind of stuff's way out of my pay grade, but it also takes a couple of years to actually arrange all the travel stuff.
Yeah, I bet. What would it take to replace something in the British Museum? Because like you said, the cases are all full, but I'm sure if there was a big enough find or something cool enough, they'd be like, we've got to make space for this. Is there like a criteria of what's important enough?
It depends. When it comes down to, I mean, I was given advice on the to Llandudno Museum about some things, asking how long think certain objects have been on display, because some objects need to be rotated just for their own safety, whereas paintings, prints, some objects just need always to be rotated. But then it's also some objects, you have to make a decision, is it actually safe for them to be on display, and then is it safe to actually move them from display? To rotate specific ones, there is a Iron Age bark shield that is on display now at the British Museum, and that was worked on and conserved by Leicester University, and that was put on display. But the objects it replaced, they've been on display for about 20 odd years, so it was their time to come off. But then you also have to think there's miles and miles of networks of tunnels and stores underneath every museum. So then you have to think of, once the object, it's not just as simple as taking the object off, it's where does the object go to live once you've taken it off. So you need a specific place in the store for that object to live. And even some of the stores are jam-packed as well. So yeah, that's why even getting, like, if you have, say, if somebody decides to leave 150 prints bequeathed you, so they're not even around to say, for you to tell them, there's like, no, it's fine, because they bequeathed them, which means they have passed on, and in their will, or however it's done, they have said, these can go to the British Museum, or these can go to the National Portrait Gallery, or something like that. And then you've got to find space for it. So you have to find space for maybe 100 jars, or a coffin, or very, very random stuff. I mean, there's space where things can go, but there's sometimes you have to have the proper storage space in tow for it as well. And yeah, display cases, even for the smaller museums, can cost up to 5 or 10 grand, let alone the massive display case, which Sutton Hoo could go in, or the Wellcome Collection. They can cost multiple, like sometimes longer than my phone number.
Right.
Okay. If that's a good enough
ridiculous
answer to the
amounts
question.
of money. Yeah.
Yes, which could sometimes go to better paid staff, but that's a whole different debate.
Oh, I know. I've been here before.
Yeah, you said archaeologist, so I'm with you. Yes.
I mean, it's in terms of in size compared to the BM, it's not anywhere close. But I work at the Cultural History Museum, or Museum of Cultural History in Oslo, which is one of the biggest
cool.
ones. Yeah.
Nice. I was there last year. Very cool.
Oh.
Yeah.
Glad to have you, even though I didn't see you.
I'm like a ninja in museums, so I kind of like I skirt around, and even though I know people, I don't want to disturb them by saying like hello. Yeah. I just flash my icon pass or my BM pass and say hello, can I come in for free, or random things like that.
Oh, do you get access?
Depends. It depends. I went to an unnamed museum a couple of weeks ago, and if it's little, I do draw a line. If it's a small museum, I will always pay.
No, yeah.
Like anytime I go around, like I've worked a lot in Spain, I've worked a lot in France, and if it's little museums, then it's like €4 or something like that. Then I will always pay, like no matter where I've gone. I walked up a motorway once by accident because I followed Google Maps to get to a museum in the middle of nowhere, and it was €4. And by the time I got there, because technically you probably shouldn't walk down motorways.
I don't think you should.
You shouldn't. My legs were dripping with blood because I nearly got hit by a car and I had to jump into the bushes. By the time I got to this place, it was like €4, and it's kind of like, yep, no problem at all. Because little museums, I know how much funding they need. When it comes to bigger museums, though, I am the first person to kind of go like, yep, hi, I work at the British Museum. And if they say, if I get my ID out and they say, no, I also belong to the International Council of Museums, ICOM, which is a
How fancy does that sound?
Oh, they're fantastic they're a fantastic resource. They help museums internationally. They're brilliant. They offer training, also for conservation. If you're looking for conservators, and that's one of the things again about big museums versus little museums, which I'll do a little segue back into. If hypothetically you're walking around, and I remember touching on this before, because I think one of the questions from the listeners was, have I ever broken an object, or have you ever seen an object break? And if that does happen in a big institution, you are in luck if it's a really big museum, because there's probably about between 500 to 1,000 people that work for the BM.
So you can just blame somebody else. You just prop it back up until the next person checks the cover and then it falls.
I couldn't possibly comment on previous incidents with other members of staff, but you are in luck because you have a whole building of conservators, from stone to metals to organics to papers, and they are magicians. They can pretty much fix everything. They are literally on the other side of the building, and they are the nicest people you'll ever. And they're wizards. They will not only will they fix things, they will. If it's stone, sometimes they will fix it, and you won't even know it's a fix. They'll paint the plaster to blend in with the rest of the statues. They're legends, and they are the nice. If something does go wrong, they're the nicest people. They're the nicest people if something goes right. But if you're in tears in front of an object which chose to die, then they will also be very reassuring, saying it wasn't your fault, it just had to happen. But if you're in a smaller museum and you don't have anybody, and something goes disastrously wrong, or if something even small happens, like you take it for a lot of people take it for granted when they work in a massive museum, that all they have to do is pick up the phone and within an hour they can have a member of conservation team. If you're in a small museum, not only do you not have that facility, you'll have to look through a list, and it's something that ICOM actually does. You know where all the specific conservators are in your specific territory, and they've got a list for them. You go down the ICOM list, but then it also costs a hell of a lot of money. Whereas if you're in a big museum, it's kind of like, I'll just get on the phone, and they said we'll come round in about like 20 minutes, and it's done.
I don't know why this just reminded me. Have you seen the Mr. Bean film, the original one, when he breaks the painting and then like just draws on it with pen? And I don't know why that came to mind. Of like, And it's a bit unfair on small museums, like just them being repaired with like just this little marker pen.
I saw that at a test screening in a BAFTA cinema in Piccadilly,
Yeah.
and they had the Beetlejuice soundtrack as its backing because the score hadn't been finished yet. I think that was the only time I saw that movie. Um, but they did the an unnamed museum in Egypt had an incident with a very famous object,
Oh,
and
I think I know what you're talking about.
oh yes, and that went disastrously wrong. But I believe it probably got a lot more visitors due to the uproar. But it was that Mr. Bean kind of territory. And anyone does a quick Google search and they can probably find out what I'm talking about, that one.
Was it the
But
one with the mask and the beard thing? Yep.
yeah, just the
Yep.
beard. Yep.
I'm throwing out
Uh,
hints here, guys, if people want to Google
Can
while
we?
still remaining
But
anonymous.
if you can
yeah,
Google it, can we not just? Is it not public knowledge? Can we not talk about it?
if you're comfortable with it, Richard, I can say what it was.
you can go for your life, but as a museum
They,
professional, and I know how hard they've worked specifically out there as well.
Yeah.
It was quite sad.
Okay.
it was something belonging to an extremely famous mummy.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
they've gone for a major refit as well because in technically
And the
that
thing
can't.
is, it was an accident. Shit happens.
Oh yeah,
And that's an
I
important thing to remember too as museum professionals, right? That we're also people. So sometimes
yeah.
things go
Um,
wrong.
one of the things that when I took the year off from the British Museum, one of the things I've always done since about 2006 at the British Museum was training staff. Because I've worked both front of house and back of house. I was on the team that basically recreated a massive training package to actually teach front of house staff how they can actually look after the back of how they can actually look at the collection, look after the collection, I should say. And I took every single incident I've been a part of as part of the salvage team at the British Museum. And I took that to the small museum in Llandudno, who were literally a volunteer museum. There's only 2 paid members of staff there. And everyone looks at major museums like da, da, da. Nothing can go wrong. It's the
Mm-mm.
holy land, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of British Museum employees feel that the first couple of weeks when they get there as well. But I showed the volunteer team because I basically took over the collections department when I was redesigning the stores, and I basically trained everybody up as far as I could to a British Museum standard. But I had to show them incidents and show them things that could go wrong. And there's an incident where I picked up an object, and I told them sometimes it's an object's time; it just wants to die. You can't help it, or it's I always talk about the 10 agents of deterioration, 10 agents of decay, which people work in museums. That's the thing they have to put in to get a job. You have to know the 10 agents of decay and how you can basically fight against them. Because whether you've got temperature, humidity, those are the main kind of things that will basically just destroy an object if they're not maintained, whether it's in storage or on display. And if they're not maintained, some of the objects will just be waiting for their time just to fall to pieces.
Mhm.
Which is very depressing. And that's the thing, if that does happen, how much money does a small museum have to actually get it sent off? And how much money does the big museum have? They just need to pay somebody.
Mhm.
Whereas a small museum, they're going to have to transport it. They're going to have to get a right conservator. And will it be a good conservator? I'll go through a list of like accredited conservators, but it can still be a little bit hit and miss.
Mhm. Is there not like a government funding for that kind of thing when museum things get damaged? Because again, like somebody not in that world, I just would assume that things in a museum would be kind of, I don't know. I feel like they would all just be owned by the government, but that's probably really just naive of me.
I am a how much should I say? I'll be very honest. I've worked in museums so long through 2 different governments now. Well, I could say 2.5 because I came in at just a little bit before the previous Labour government came in. In this time, the only thing I've seen governments doing is cut budgets, cut budgets, cut budgets. They couldn't give
Right.
a
Okay.
and even though they will say like, "Oh yes, culture and stuff is important to us," but nah, music governments. It's the first they've had to. I think 2 years in a row we had to cut our budget at the BM by like 20%.
Wow.
They'll use and they'll use a lot of it as bandstanding. especially in bigger museums, to kind of like say, oh, British Museum, yeah, rah, 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 but they'll just cut the budget. There's been before when I started at a BM back in 2002, because of government cutbacks, I think 200 members of staff got made redundant. British
Oof.
Museum members, British Museum members of staff who have been in the museum for over 30 years while I've been away a year also got made redundant, and it's all because of government cutbacks,
And I
budget.
also hate
Very
that phrase
sad.
"made redundant" because they're not redundant. There's just no money to pay them anymore.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
and also, and this is where I probably, should stop talking. But sometimes of that there is wastage of money and there is bad management decisions which
Oh,
shouldn't get to that. Um,
100%.
yeah,
Absolutely.
and that is the same as any kind of business. And then you get things that happened. A review might have happened 15 years ago, and then it was changed like 10 years ago, and then they make the same decision 5 years ago. And you also, it's a case of we have to do with more with less because of previous decisions. So yeah, it's a mixture of government cutback and bad decisions. Story of my life, really.
Yeah.
That's a different podcast.
So back to like small versus large. Is there a a point where an object becomes, say, so important or so expensive that a small museum just couldn't look after it? Is there that kind of thing, or even maybe where like a small museum wouldn't want it because it's like it's more difficult maybe to care for something
Yeah.
that decays easy or is very expensive when it comes down to insurance?
Yeah, there's another element to it as well, though. It depends what you call important object. Um, yes, there is the funding to put a proper case in, and it's not just the case, it's the security of the case as well, and it's security of the building as well, and it's the environmentals of the museum, the case as well. So it will cost more money to have a display case with environmental monitoring. And so you have to add a humidifier or a sealer pump if there's metals as well, so you avoid the tarnishing. And it had to be properly sealed, so that raises the fund exponentially. But then it's also, what does the little museum class as an important object? It might just be something. I mean, the Vinderlander tablets, they look like pieces of card or really dirty cardboard. They were found in a puddle and they were just letters. So intrinsically, there is no monetarily value to something like that because they just look like a bit of paper. But when you see how important they are at their point in history, because there's nothing else like them found up there, and then you get there's an object which is the horse jaw, which is a very famous object from Llandudno Museum, but they only have a replica there because the original is sitting in the basement in the British Museum. Yes, but Llandudno Museum is a small provincial local museum which wouldn't have the money unless it was a serious heritage lottery funding to put anything like that on display permanently, because they don't have much money for an environmentally controlled case.
So would something like a horse jaw need a special environmental?
It's organic, so it probably needs humidified storage, humidified display. So it's very expensive to do. And then you'd need a member of staff to actually go and monitor that and to refill, dehumidifier, or just to empty it as well. There's so many little elements to it. It would be amazing. It's been back there on loan about 3 times, but it's one of the things when you sign up to take an object on loan, you have to basically promise that you will take care of it, and you have to tick a lot of boxes. And its security and its environmental monitoring as well and stuff like that to actually make sure the object is going to stay secure and as good as it was when it left. Because before you take an object out, the conservation have to sign off on it, and the museum, various people in the museum, nearly said various pizzas, but various people in the museum have to basically sign off on it and say it's okay. Then it has to be conserved to make sure it actually looks good enough to go on tour. But then a member of staff like me, or the 40 to 50 other people that are exactly like me, they also have to pack it. They have to do condition checking, take loads of photos of it, and then when they packed it, when they unpack it at the other opposite museum, they have to get it out, check it to the photos, make sure it's okay, and then they have to double check the environmental controls to make sure the case that it's going to go into is good. And if the museum doesn't tick those boxes, and it can get very awkward.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
because if you're unpacking an object, you get to the other museum, no matter where it is around the world, and sometimes language can be a problem as well. When you get the object there, and if the case is not up to spec, if the environmentals are not up to spec, or if there's other issues surrounding that place, you might, worst case scenario, have to say, I'm afraid I've got to take the object back.
Oh, that must be yeah. I was going
Which
to ask whether when you loaned something out, it kind of came with its own case to look after it, but
no,
no.
case it's actually I can't talk too much about displaced
Okay.
cases and because of security stuff.
Mm.
But there are some specific tours we have done where we have taken display cases and pre-built them in exhibitions that are traveling. But it's very rare, and I know we've only done it for a couple of them for like Aisha in Spain. But 9 times out of 10, the venue we're going to already has the cases built, and it's cheaper for them as well if they got special cases. If you go to a lot of major exhibitions, they've already got cases pre-made, and they just wheel them around, or they're still like. So if you go to a special exhibition, in some places, you'll always see different objects but the same cases. And 9 times out of 10, that's the same for us as well. They just be the same cases but just wheeled around to different parts of the galleries.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. It's Margrethe, I feel like I've been hugging. Do you have anything you want to jump in with?
Well, I'm and not and not more than just saying I even though I don't have experience from a large of an institution as the BM, I have a lot of empathy for basically everything Richard said so far. And I'm also really curious about the cemetery tours. How does that work? And what was it like? What does it entail? What is a cemetery tour?
Have you ever been to London?
Well, yeah, my
I'm
parents live
presuming
there
you have.
actually.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
cool. You've been to Highgate Cemetery.
No.
Okay. Have you been to Père Lachaise in Paris?
No, the only cemetery-like thing that I've done is I've done one of the ghost tours in Edinburgh.
Okay, proper tourist mode then. And that
Well, my
was
first time there, I can't say anything else in my
I've
defense.
done it. I've
yeah.
done it as well, but mine was in the vaults
Oh,
underneath.
cool. Yeah. So you've done Greyfriars and things like that, and you've done Mary Close underneath Edinburgh.
Mary
That's probably
Close
one
was
of
the
the
one that we did. Yeah.
yeah. Basically, there were 8 massive cemeteries. This is where I go into cemetery conversation. There
Yes.
was before like early 1800s, you could only get married. You can only get buried in a local churchyard. But the problem with that is, the UK was way behind on the times, and the Victorians had this belief that when you get resurrected, you came back as is, and the problem with that, if you got buried in a local churchyard, especially ones in London in Soho, and typical London Victorian weather, it was grey, it was dark, it was raining, and the church, and that's where I have to remember where my camera is. When you got buried, your common graves, you got buried at the bottom, then it stacked.
It's only that much space.
Yeah, and the problem is when you get to the top, you had stories of dogs coming back with hands and feet and things like that, which is a bit grim. But then you also had body snatchers as well. And if you're up in Edinburgh, you probably heard of Burke and Hare and a lot of the body snatchers and stuff. And the problem is when you believed you were going to come back resurrected, ready to go, if you were missing a head, if you were missing a hand, if you're
That could
missing
get
limbs.
problematic.
Exactly. And then it's also the problem when you got cremated as well, because that was a very big, sometimes legal or a bit of a taboo. So the government changed its rules. They allowed private cemeteries to be built, and that's when London, who had a massive problem with dead, because the Victorians also had that belief in the miasma effect, that the blackness and the putrefied, and it will spread disease and stuff like that. War and cholera didn't help, but that was the weird belief, because Victorians were a little bit weird.
I mean, yeah, this is especially the way that we think about stuff today too. It's a bit different than they did back then.
Yeah, definitely. So they gave the creation of private cemeteries, and London had 8 cemeteries, which are now called the Magnificent Seven. And
That's a
one of
lovely
them,
name.
yeah, it's like the Seven Wonders of the Ancient World and kind of thing. But because of the Seven Wonders of the Ancient World, Mausoleum Halicarnassus is one of the reasons mausoleums are called mausoleums.
Right, of
Because
course.
yeah, because that was Mausolus, and this is where I go into British Museum kind of dork terms because the Mausoleum Halicarnassus is a little bit there. There is a mausoleum that is modelled after Halicarnassus in Highgate. So
That
Highgate
tracks.
was
Hmm.
Highgate was modelled after Père Lachaise as a little garden, as a garden cemetery on a hill that is at its highest point is at the same level as St Paul's Cathedral in London. And yeah, it's one of the most famous and most beautiful as well. You got people like Karl Marx buried there. You have some family of Charles Dickens, and it's also where they filmed like Taste the Blood of Dracula, Indomitable Dr. Phibes, and it's also got Douglas Adams as well from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and lots of other famous people. And Fantastic Beasts was filmed there, but I'm more of a Lord of the Rings person, so I haven't actually watched that yet. And yeah, it's
I mean,
got
it's not, I don't know if it's worth your time, but sure, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, but it's got lots of famous poets, lots of artists, and it's quite a gothic cemetery as well. So
Yeah, because
it's
the thing is, I
quite
sometimes
famous.
feel like I have been there, but I haven't. But because I've seen it used, or not necessarily the actual place itself, but I've seen it referred to in movies and shows. And I've also just, when you were talking about it, I remember like a book that I read last year took place in
Hmm.
Highgate Cemetery. I was like, oh, right,
Yeah,
right, that was the thing.
it's quite famous as well because during the 70s and the 80s, all of these cemeteries went bankrupt. So they all got closed down. Because if you build this little city of the dead, because all the bodies were stored in perpetuity, which always
Hmm.
freaks out people from the continent, especially Italy and Spain, because if you can't pay up after a certain amount of time, or your family doesn't exist anymore, then your body will get taken out and it will get put into a common section. Whereas if it's in perpetuity, it's meant to be stored for all time to add into that help with your body being resurrected to get ready to go when it all comes back.
Mhm.
But you build this little city of death and there's no more room to expand, so there's no more money coming in. So that's what bankrupted all the cemeteries. And Highgate was somebody a while back said they saw somebody floating above Highgate Cemetery. So a mob got together and they broke into the cemetery repeatedly, desecrated a lot of the coffins,
Oh no.
went into the catacombs, and there was a couple of imprisonments, and there's a myth called the Highgate Vampire because of that. It was very, very bad, and I will never condone anything like that. But the flip side to that is because people saw what had happened, the Friends of Highgate Cemetery bought it for, I think, £1 from Camden Council, and they took over the cemetery and they've restored it and they've started doing restoration projects in it. So if it wasn't for that, the cemetery wouldn't be in the condition it is now. And there's some amazing places there. Yeah,
Wow.
it's very, very cool.
What, what was the reason for it being damaged? If you know, what's the escalation point from there apparently being a ghost floating above the cemetery, which I would think most people would think was pretty cool. And if you were going to go and like
Mm.
check it out, I don't know, I feel like ghost hunters would be quite respectful.
I'm just
So
gonna butt in here and say that I also think that people for a long time have been just were terrified of death, and we deal with that in different ways.
yeah, but
Um,
I don't think to like desecrate graves, it feels
I, I think, and an answer to this, and an answer to why do people do many things like that is because people are mostly, well, I won't, I've already sworn once, so I won't do it again. But people are just can be really stupid. People do bad things.
yeah.
Whether it's going into a cemetery, and even I found member of the public laying down on somebody quite famous's grave, singing to Instagram followers for a singer that was buried. And even though it's not dragging out somebody's coffin, it's still sitting on somebody's grave and doing disrespectful stuff just for a couple of Instagram followers. And then you have people doing stupid things in museums as well. I think people are just, I mean, we've got graffiti on objects in the museum which were dated to around a couple of thousand BC. And people are going to do stupid things throughout history. So whether it's like desecrating an object, which was an object which was still on a palace back in Ashurbanipal's days, or trashing a cemetery in 1970s, people are always stupid.
Mm-hmm.
So I laid down my line there.
No. It's
Oh, but I think
fine.
that's a good line because also it's like, yeah, there are a plethora of reasons for people doing stupid shit, but it always comes back to people doing stupid shit, and then it's context specific about the reasoning behind the stupid shit.
Yeah. Do you think there is somebody back in the day in Hagia Sophia that saw graffiti in the ceiling from a Viking and just went, how the fuck am I going to get that out of the roof? Um,
Probably, yeah.
and
They're
did
probably
they
like,
fit
fuck's sake.
those?
People being people.
And they probably just went, those bloody Scandinavian assholes have come over here and they've let them in for 2 seconds, and now we've got to get a scaffold built, we've got to get up there, or do we just leave it there? That kind of thing. But that's the cool thing. I love my best friend. She did a PhD in graffiti, and she will probably speak more on. It's the only thing more boring than me talking about museums. Her talk about graffiti on ancient amphora on the Black Sea trade routes.
That sounds like a treat, to be honest.
I joke, but yeah, it's an amazing talk, and I've heard her give it variations of it quite a lot, and I've read quite a few of her papers, and they are very cool. And the graffiti is fascinating, but there was always going to be somebody else back in the time going like, "Why do you have to do that? I got to clean it up now." Whereas a couple of thousand years later, it's kind of like, we'll cover that with we'll cover that with perspex because this is now a historical document. This is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. I guess yes, it's all down to context. So
Yeah, definitely.
maybe the ones in the British Museum in a few hundred years will be
They get cleaned off straight away.
oh,
Yeah, I have. There have been incidents where school children have accidentally hit things with pencils or things like that, and they get cleaned off straight away.
accidentally in quotation marks.
Yes, most of the time, accidentally.
I think, like, from at least from my experience of, herding groups of fourth graders around a museum, that seems like almost more plausible than a kid sitting down and actually intentionally drawing on something. It's them just like not being aware of where their hands or their pockets are and just like, whoops.
Yeah. I mean, but on the flip side to that as well, when I've given training to members of staff, and one of their first questions is when I was training in front of house staff and security staff, and one of their first questions was like, oh, so what do I do if somebody comes up with a sledgehammer and tries smashing this object? What do I do?
You
And it was
body
like,
tackle them.
oh yeah, I remember saying specifically to a lady who said it. I was just like, do you know Kung Fu? And she was like, I do MMA. And I was just like, cool. It was still the same answer. Move the fuck out the way. Let them do whatever they're going to do. You're protecting the members of the public first and yourself. You get out the way. You call assistance. You let people know what's going on, but you take care of the members of the public because, and this is where I sound very wishy-washy, no one can replace yourself if you get hit over the head, and no one can replace the other members of the public. So you take care of the public first and yourself, and then some as another member of staff who might be able to repair the object. Objects, yeah, you can get masterpieces, things that can't be replaced, but as far as a human being getting bad, you take care of them first.
Yeah, I didn't think about it because we are kind of in this weird time where there are certain groups who like to throw paint on things.
Yeah.
And I feel like that could, the British Museum, I feel, would be a real kind of prime place for those types of people to target.
Because I've not been at the British Museum for a year, I don't know what our social media policy or if there's been any updates on what I'm allowed to talk about. But
Okay.
I will say, because I always say that I'm a cog in the machine at the BM. There are many people who do this. I'm assistant collection manager. I'm on my specific team in Britain, Europe, and prehistory. I'm one of 5, and in the greater department of collections, there's about probably about 40 to 60 assistant collection managers who assigned to different departments. But of all of those, I'm probably one of maybe 1 to 5 that have actually worked front of house as well. And I'm the only one who has dealt with all the crap that comes, all the disasters that have happened. I know for a fact that I'm the only one who has had somebody die in my hands in the Great Court. I'm the only one who's dealt with major protests and crazy incidents that have happened just as soon as you walk through the door in the morning. So I've dealt with quite a lot of crap that's happened there as well. So I have dealt with a lot of protests. I've dealt with a team when you're trying to secure protests, and they've got legitimate reason to protest. And if they do come into protest, we'll just let them continue. But it's when you get a call, whereas a Banksy has been put on the wall or things like that, or you might get those scenes you see at the Louvre where somebody's throwing stuff at the Mona Lisa. We haven't had anything that crazy yet. We have incidents, and sometimes the legitimate reasons why they are protesting, whether it's oil sponsorship or other stuff like that. But I'm always okay with protests. If no object's getting harmed, there's no member of the public's getting harmed, then I think everyone's got free reign to do it as long as they treat the staff with respect and the objects with respect. My relationship with protests has been totally okay. Because in the scheme of things, if they're allowing people to come in and out of the museum, if they're not blocking fire exits, if they're not being assholes to everybody, then it's totally okay, as long as they're not disrupting the main flow. But when it comes to objects, no object's ever been harmed by any protest at the BM, thankfully.
Yeah, I feel like that's quite surprising. I would have
Sorry for the tirade there.
No, that's
I think it's a good one, and it's an important one. To also remember, especially your focus on the safety of the people of the public as well. It's like, yeah, this is a cool thing, but the health and safety of the people around you is as irreplaceable.
Oh, it's paramount. If you can't, it's one of the things about, I'll use that as a segue to go back into big versus small. When you walk into a big museum, you have to think of what drew somebody to the museum and to get a scope of how big an institution you are. Yes, you might have seen it via Instagram. Sometimes the big nationals, you don't actually know what's in the museum. You just know it's there because of word of mouth. But you have to think of like what might have drawn you to it. Was a picture on social media or an advertisement. So you got to think before you even got to the museum, there is a website team, there is an advertising team, there's a broadcast communications team to do all kind of advertising. And then when you get to the gates of a museum, then you think of there's a security team. So there's many people there. That when you get into the actual museum, there's a visitor services team. Then you think going to the galleries and there's people that put stuff on display, and there's posters that are on display, and there's so many elements to work in a museum. And then there's the health and safety team, which overrides pretty much everything. Are lights going to stay attached to the ceilings? Are fire shutters and all the kind of health and safety things in place? There are so many different elements, and the health and safety of the people will always come before the collections, and that's how it should be.
100%.
Yeah, and a lot of work goes into that as well. An awful lot of work.
Yeah.
One of the first things we talked about is how long things can take, and I remember it took me 2 years to get permission to drill into a wall of the British Museum to put a barrier up saying gallery closed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it took me 6 months to change a light bulb once in a big museum. Whereas if you go to
that sounds like a joke.
No, it's serious. I wish it was. But then you go to a smaller museum and say, "Can I do that?" And they go, "Yeah, no problem." And I put 3 lights straight away on a staircase, which was in darkness in a small museum. And it's kind of like, and all the staff were just like, "Why didn't we think of that?" And it was like, well, this is what I've got to teach you guys to do to kind of get you to giving you the confidence where you can make decisions for the betterment of the place. Ask permission, they say yes, just do it, which doesn't happen in a big museum.
They must have thought all their Christmases came at once when you just turned up in Clendon, because it's kind of out of the way. It's north.
Yeah.
It's what, northwest Wales. It's not really, it's not like a through like a thoroughfare through it. It's pretty much just a destination on its own. You kind of go in there. So I imagine not many people with your experience end up there.
It's definitely an end of a line place for so many reasons. But sorry.
It's all right.
It was when I was having my interview there, because I got really worried. The first email I wrote to him, I didn't get a reply, and I thought, oh, have they thought there's a guy from the British Museum giving it all that, saying we need to improve? And I got really worried, thinking they thought I was just some egotistical asshole from the. Well, the BM does to carry a certain reputation,
Okay.
but finally, when we did meet, they just said, well, I don't think doing tickets is going to be a good thing for us. We'll put you on a collections team straight away. And that's when it all kind of just went, okay, no problem. But I think I showed them the first thing I did, because I renovated in 1 year. This museum went from a store which was, I mean, it's a very random collection. Victorian stuff, Neolithic, art. They had arms and armor from the Civil War back up. They had a little tiny bit possible Renaissance, then medieval. It's a crazy collection, which every small local museum has crazy collections. But it was all mangled together, and the stores were in a bit of disarray. But the first thing I did was when I walked, it's very hard to explain in just conversation without showing you photos, but because it's a store, I didn't have that many photos. But I went to the store and it was basically a furniture store. And I could see a staircase on the above all the furniture, but you can actually walk to it. So I said, can you give me a day where I can just reorganize some stuff? And I showed them that with some organization, and I showed them how to update a database for it as well and do some changes, that I made a through route and I'd saved them so much space. But it looked like it was Moses separating the Red Sea, just making this one corridor where they could actually get through. And I trained them. They'd never had any collections handling training. They'd never had any kind of collections awareness training or pinning training or display training. So I trained them from everything, and the same kind of training that I did at the BM. But I showed them it just takes 1 day and just a little bit of thought just to kind of make one little thing better, then you can see where everything else falls into place. And by the time I'd left, the museum had its own armory. Instead of having arms and armor scattered around the whole base, which is slightly insecure. We'd actually put it into, I'd made a secure store for loans, I'd made a secure store for the armory, and Llandudno Museum have its own armory. But one of the most amazing things I did, and which I'm very, very proud of, and if anyone's ever in North Wales and is interested, one of the things I set up a program, because one of the things, there are so many separate teams at a big institution. What we did, one of the reasons I did what I did in the basement, not only to secure the collections and to make it a bit more safe, was I had to figure out a way for a small museum to generate revenue. And that is where, once I figured out and designed the new stores and actually put it all together and made it work, I realized that they were that good. I could actually bring people down into the actual stores to bring people closer to collection. And we did that. And it was very scary at first. And even a little museum, it was hard to actually, not hard to convince, but hard to actually get the message out. Because I ended up being a social media manager as well for the museum's collections department. But the museum had never done anything like it. And it is very hard for so many different aspects, whether it's health and safety, security, to bring people back of house into a museum. But it's also very hard to get the word out to say, hey, do you want to come and see a museum, which a lot of people don't know exists. But we did, because the museum closed for a month in December, we could only do it on one specific date before we closed, because we was ahead of schedule in doing the planning. So it was either we do the beta test to do a back of house tour either in December to see if we can possibly get revenue generation, or we close for a month and then try it in February. But financially, a small museum, it was on the cusp of closing down at one point. There was a big charity walk. There was lots of things to try and get money into the museum because at one point there was a talk of the museum closing down in April because of lack of funding. So it was either we had one specific date before it closed down at the beginning of December, or we don't do it at all, and it might have never happened. And there was various elements on outside the museum were coming into conflicting. Could I actually carry it off and pull it off? But as soon as we put tickets on sale, I think we sold out the first tour, and I said, well, let's try and do another tour on the same day. And we actually had 2 sold out tours
nice.
for the back of house tours.
That's
And then
amazing.
it was cool. I've never had a project. I've taken a few amazing things around the world, and I've been a part of some amazing projects at the BM, but I've never been more terrified for a project not working than I had doing this thing.
Because there's a lot at stake on like such a smaller but bigger level at the same time.
Yeah, and it wasn't just it wasn't. I've never looked at it as a reputational thing. I've like, as I said, I'm just a cog in the machine, but it was the other volunteers in the museum that was on part of the team where I've been kind of hyping them up, saying, we're going to change everything. We're going to do some amazing things. And then it was the pressure from the director, who was lovely and I'm supportive. I've never had that relationship with the people above me where they've been so trustworthy on my ideas. And there was a lot of pressure, and there was the pressure of the local community as well, just like their local museum, and trying to save it and trying to represent the local community and showing what Llandudno can offer. And it worked. It was fantastic. And the tours are now still going. The rest of the volunteer team and the collections team, they're now carrying on tours while I'm gone. But I should be back in December as my anniversary for the first tour, be doing some lectures up there and some training as well, and redoing some of the tours. So
Amazing.
I'm very proud of them. It's been some amazing stuff there. Good. But if people do want to go to Llandudno, they just have to look up Llandudno Museum Unseen on the website, and they can go back of house and they can check out the Field Club collection, which is absolutely bonkers insane. They can see the armory as well, and they can also see the rest of the museum free after the tour, and it'll be £10. It's fantastic.
Wow, that's not that. Wow.
Shameless plug, but
you
they're
should
fantastic.
You should be very proud of it.
Yeah. Shit.
I can't help think. Do you think there would be an avenue to kind of do this type of thing full time for you? Or is it something that you could like sell to the British Museum to let you do? Because it seems like there are probably tons of small museums dying for the knowledge that you have. I'm sure Llandudno is not just an isolated instance of a museum that just doesn't have the knowledge and the kind of capacity to be able to grow. But all it would take is somebody like yourself who could maybe go and spend 6 months there and teach them how to do things and how to grow. And it feels like that would be beneficial to so many.
The BM, and although I've tapped onto it a few times, saying a lot of people think the BMs are bad guys, but we do the Iraqi heritage scheme as well. So they were training actual archaeologists from Iraq to do archaeology in their own countries. We do the ITP, which is the International Training Program, training up other museums from all over the world. We got a program called the BM Young People, which is training up future archaeologists and future museum workers. And we do have an amazing outreach team that does send out other members of staff. It's very rare that someone from the BM takes a year off and then says to a local museum, "Hi, I can do stuff." But I think financially it's a big hit, not just on the BM if they actually paid somebody to go around for
of course,
years. But I also think that, and it's one of the other things, it's how a lot of people can get into museums by going to smaller museums, because you never know who's out there. And I do think if you want a career in museums, then everyone wants to go and like work for the Louvre or go work for the Getty or go work for the BM and stuff like that, because it's just like it's amazing. But if you get in, getting in can be a trick in itself. But once you're in, you could be very segmented into what you're doing. Whereas if you go to a smaller museum, I've had over 20 years experience, 25 years experience in museums. I've done quite a bit. Whereas got to a museum in Llandudno, and technically I went to North Wales for a job that didn't exist in social media. Ironically, I ended up doing more in social media for the museum than I did in this job that got offered, which didn't exist because of various fuckheads. Probably shouldn't have said that, but hey.
That's all right.
Don't worry about it. We're linguistically very liberal here.
Cool.
We are, yeah.
But I've done a lot of things. I ended up doing lots of conservation work, lots of teaching of photography, various things that I've done on a smaller scale, but I've never had to do taxidermy as well for a museum's collection. Because if I didn't do it, then a half of the taxidermy collection basically goes, it's either going to cost a couple of £1,000 or I'm going to do it. And that was the kind of thing. We don't have a couple of £1,000. We're not going to get a grant for it. Can Richard do it? So that's the kind of decisions you have to make. So even of all the experience I've had, I've gone to a smaller museum and even I've learned something, which is fantastic. And I've then come away with a stacked CV just from working in a smaller museum for a year.
That's wonderful. Maybe we could fund it through some sort of TV show like Richard Wakeman's Museum Nightmares, modeled on Gordon Ramsay's fame. And we just sit around the different museums.
I think that there are people, museums are very inbred. There are people that love to work with me, and there are probably people that would hate to work with me. And
that's the beauty, that's the drama that comes with the show, because you have to have drama with these types of shows as well.
I really wish museums and life was drama free. I'm absolutely sick of drama. I'm dramaed out for the year.
Yeah.
And if you go back to any kind of like workplace or building, then there's going to be dramas no matter where you go.
Yeah,
which is
How about
great.
we pitch it with a slightly different angle? Richmond Wakeman's Museum Mysteries, because then you got the suspense there instead.
We could talk about British Museum hauntings as well then, and the ghosts and stuff that allegedly go around. But I will say though, there are, and I said it before, I'm one of many assistant collection managers at the museum. I was collection manager at Llandudno, and there are some amazing collection managers at the British Museum. There are, and I'll try and say this as carefully as I can, there are people that I've been doing this job for a while. There are people on the same level as me. There are some people at the same job title and collection manager, which I would look up to as gods. But you never hear about what they do because they don't post about it on Instagram or Facebook or stuff like that. The only reason I've got a little following is because I'm like a kid in a candy store. I'll upload something I think looks amazing on Instagram. That's how me and Dan got together. That's how we found about, because I never take any day for granted. But there are some amazing people that do some amazing work that you never hear about. There's a lady who managed the Stonehenge exhibition, the World at Stonehenge, which was probably one of the career highlight for me. And it was the end of COVID, had to manage loans, and there's a lot of different teams that come in, but having to deal with the end of COVID, different museums are bringing different objects, different museum teams are catching COVID when they're supposed to deliver objects to a museum that has a specific day where the exhibition has to open. And it was one of the biggest exhibitions coming out of COVID that the country had seen for a long, long time. And how one person can manage everything, not break a sweat, be there every morning, first in the door, last to leave. But you never hear about their stories. And so I look up, even though people might think of like it might be Richard's museums, there are people that I look up to as just gods and goddesses, but you never hear about their story. And I think that's where I go into, I'm a bit of a BM groupie, because even though I might complain about the place quite a bit, I know that the amazing work that it does do, and I like talking about the people who you don't usually hear about, the conservation department, the photographic department. They're just some amazing departments that do amazing things. Sorry,
Wonderful.
soapbox
No.
moment.
Yeah, no. Let's we've been
I
going
love that.
for a while now. Let's wrap this up.
Oh crap! I'm sorry.
It's all right. No.
Apologies.
No.
Let's wrap this up. We're
So
gonna do
that we have time for questions.
yeah, we're gonna do the Q&A after this because I'm sure there will be a bunch. But we're gonna start with how let's start the Q&A after with how people can get into working for a museum, a little bit more details on that. So if you do want to hear more on that, then you can check out that on our Patreon. It's just Patreon/Nordic Mythology podcast. Like I say, it starts from £3 a month, and you can hear all the Q&As. But yeah, that we'll start with that, and then we'll go into that. But to wrap up today, Richard, do you want to let people know where they can follow you and see all the beautiful things that you post?
Well, I haven't really posted that much beautiful things because not only did I take a year off from the BM, I didn't take a break from social media, but I was taking. There was one. I'm trying to set up a tattoo studio with my partner as well, so I can't show you pictures of me just going like, "Oh my God, I'm covered in paint." That'll
But
be
you're
on the
going
story
back
section.
soon in 10
Yes.
days, so I'm
Yes.
excited.
Yes, it might not be the same as it used to be. There have been some high-profile incidents at the BM in the year I've been away from it.
Oh no.
So I'm not sure what the rules and regulations are with social media posting from staff at the BM. And I'm not sure how much I, as a member of staff, am allowed to comment without going back to the BM. But that all being said, yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to. I can't wait to get stuck in with the collection again.
Wonderful.
I really.
What's your handle? What are the platforms that people can follow you at, regardless of whatever you might post in the future?
Yeah.
You see, straight away when you said handle, I went into pick things up by the handles in museum training.
Yep.
It's just Richard
PSA
K.
announcement.
Yeah,
Sorry,
Richard K. Wakeman. But yeah, it's a very nerdy museum/cemetery social media feed, and then sometimes you might get like, "Oh my God, I just saw this on Star Trek," moments on the stories, because I'm quite boring like that.
And also shout out the tattoo studio because it's some of the best Nordic style tattoos you can get.
That's really nice of you to say.
The work speaks for itself.
Yes, Dosciata, or Gloria Notarangelo, as I commonly refer to her, or as my fiance.
Oh wow! Oh, congratulations! I didn't know that.
Yay!
Oh, yay!
Yeah. Not officially yet.
I hope she knows.
She does. But yes.
Oh, wonderful! Well, congratulations! I'm very happy for you.
But yes, we are because she used to work for an unnamed studio in Llandudno, where now we are London based. It took us a while to move down because it was very unexpectedly to move back to London. We have got an amazing location. It's about 15 minutes walk from King's Cross International. So it's
wow.
Yeah, so it's an angel in central London. So if you're coming down from York, you're going to be coming into King's Cross. So you're about a 15-minute walk up Pentonville Road, and you're there.
Oh, that's amazing.
So it's going to be old world remains, and it's in Angel, and it is we're doing some different stuff in the studio with the way we're designing it, and because we were moving from Wales to London, both in studio and in house. We've had at first we got the property before we actually moved to London. So we were paying for an empty studio for about 2 months before we could actually move to London and then start decorating and making it. We had to get hot water. We've had to get loads of things that we had to basically do from scratch in 4 weeks. But the idea is old world remains, and it's a play on the word old world, and it's going to remain. But it's also going to be old world remains, as in we were trying to go for an archaeological kind of term as well. But Gloria's our specialize in like Nordic, Scandinavian, Celtic, Pictish. But eventually, we're gonna get lots of guest artists in. We've got a few scheduled already. We're gonna keep close to our chests. And yes, we've got some pretty good plans.
Good.
I am already starting to plan, like, next time I go visit my parents, maybe I could do like a pit stop by the tattoo studio.
Yeah.
Oh, we've got some. It's one of those things to say. I mean, Gloria's done a few things. She's done things on social media before, but then have popped up in different other social media feeds. So we kind of want to keep it a bit close to our chests of the ideas we've already done in the
Of
studio.
course.
But yeah, it's looking. I'm just really proud of her as well. She's just not only she's like me. People will say, "Oh, your work is amazing," but then she'll run away and hide, and she'd never want to do this kind of thing ever, kind of like I do. But she's one of the humblest artists and kindest human beings I've ever met. So yeah, and she's worked so hard to do it. And we've both had about a crazy up and down year. And yeah, we're very close. We'll get the council meeting and licensing done in July. So hopefully after that, we'll be good to go.
Wonderful.
And
Yeah.
I can attest to the walls are 90% done, and we have our first tattoo chair put together. It's my first tattoo chair I've ever put together, and oh God, does it weigh a ton? But it's done.
I can only imagine.
They look heavy.
Yeah, they're really heavy, and all the furniture's being delivered next week as well. The rest of it, so yeah, it's all, and we have to do it before I go back to work at the British Museum. So
Wonderful.
yeah, and then I'll be still working at the BM and consulting for Llandudno Museum and tour guiding at Highgate Cemetery, but then also helping do the social media and the press for Old World Remains.
Can't wait.
Fun.
Yeah. When it's ready to go, you both should come and chat to us, and we'll have a nice chat about it. And if you can talk Gloria into it, and we can talk all about it.
If you guys want, yeah. I was thinking, like, what if we could do like an episode there at some point, Dan?
That would be
like
fun.
Getting a tattoo, if you guys are okay with it. Sure. That would be fun.
What, getting tattooed and also doing this at the same time?
Yeah.
Why? That might hurt.
That would be very. I was getting tattooed by Gloria on this.
I mean, it all depends on where you're getting tattooed, though, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
She was tattooing me here, and I remember there was another artist that had departed that studio, that shall remain nameless, called Badger King, and I remember sending him a message of me singing a song from The Little Mermaid while being tattooed to say hello to him. So sometimes if you could sing a Disney song while being tattooed, you probably say hello to a podcast as well. That being said, we could just do a podcast with just being talking rather than being tattooed.
We could get tattooed after.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I can't get tattooed for the foreseeable future because I didn't realize I have a very, very bad skin condition, which the doctors did tell me I'm never allowed to get tattooed ever again in my life.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Well,
which I only found out after getting tattooed. So yeah.
Well, good thing.
Yeah.
Because now you've already done it.
Well, I'm on drugs for the rest of my life now, so it's a bit tricky.
Oh, okay. But I hope that goes as good as possible. But yeah,
I will try and talk her into it.
Perfect, wonderful. Yeah, let's wrap this up and we'll let people ask you some questions. Mags, where can people find you?
Archeomags on Instagram with a K.
For me, it's Daniel_Farrand1 or the business Hornsboarding or the podcast, everything just Nordic Mythology podcast on all the different platforms. And don't forget YouTube, you can see all our pretty faces. So yeah, go check that out and hit the little like and subscribe.